Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
This is the NHL Wraparound Summer Cooler Series presented by Lugaroo. Vic Morren, Neil Smith. We have reached the final leg of the Summer Coolers, Neil. The Pacific Division, both wearing black because, as we've said in our earlier shows, that only 3 teams made it from the Metro. We wore black. We wore white for the Central because they had 5 teams qualify. Only 3 in the Pacific, and a lot to unpack with this division. Every team seems like it's got a very distinctively different profile.
It sure does. And you know what's great about doing these is you learn so much about these teams, and you learn early and you know what to expect or what you think you're going to expect as the season gets started here in only a little over 6 weeks now till the season actually begins. So it's a great exercise, and I think it'll illuminate these teams to the listeners.
When we did the order of the teams for the other 3 divisions, we made an exception in the Atlantic because Florida won the Stanley Cup. We're going to do the same thing here with the Edmonton Oilers because they're 2-time defending Western Conference champions, only to fall to the Panthers. But the storylines there are so compelling that I think this is a good spot to lead the show off. And no bigger storyline that is going to ride perhaps throughout the season is Connor McDavid's contract. He's a UFA after this season. He's in the last year of a deal that's paying him $12.5 million a year. We already know that Leon Draisaitl is locked up until 2033. He will be entering the first year of a $14 million a year contract. So you have to think that McDavid is going to exceed that. So the first thing that I want to do here is I actually want to talk about the team drops, the re-signs, and then the adds, because as has been reported, the McDavid negotiation is supposed to happen in 2 parts. The first part being, did the Oilers make necessary moves to improve to take that last step and win the Stanley Cup? And then the contractual part would take place after. So let's talk about the drops first. Evander Kane, traded to Vancouver. Victor Arvidsson, traded to Boston. Free agents that they lost. Corey Perry to the Kings. Connor Brown to the Devils. And that's a player that I think we both thought that Stan Bowman would make a priority in re-signing. John Klingberg goes to San Jose along with left wing Jeff Skinner, who, after 1,000 games of waiting to finally get in the playoffs, is probably going to be on the outside looking in again. Among the RFA UFA re-signs, Trent Frederick re-ups 8 years, $3.85 AAV. Kasperi Kapanen, 1 year, $1.3 million. And the big one, for more reasons than one, I think, and we'll get into that when we talk about term with McDavid, Evan Bouchard, 4 years, $10.5 million. The players that they have picked up during the offseason, Isaac Howard, left wing, 2025 Hobey Baker Award winner coming out of Michigan State. He's acquired in a trade with Tampa in exchange for center Sam Riley. Center Curtis Lazar signed as a UFA from New Jersey. And left wing Andrew Mangiapane signed as a UFA from Washington. And also add to that, defenseman Riley Stillman signed as a UFA from Carolina. So let's take the totality of the moves here and couple this with the first piece of this McDavid negotiation, the team having to get better. Quite frankly, I don't see it.
I don't see it either. And when you go through their lineup and you look at who they now have, what composes their lines, you see a very, very top-heavy team with McDavid, Hyman, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins are the main cogs up on the wheel in the forward group. And we don't know what to expect out of Isaac Howard coming into the NHL for his first year out of Michigan State. Matthew Savoy is another new player coming in or slated to come into the lineup. Then Vasily Podkolzin, I don't know what to expect out of him. You know, Vic, you've got Matthias Janmark. He was on the team last year. We know he's a fourth-line player. Adam Henrique is 39 years old. Kasperi Kapanen is really a fifth-line player that goes in and out of the lineup all the time. Trent Frederick, they gave the new contract to, but he's just a grinding third liner. Mangiapane had played in Washington last year after many years in Calgary, but is nothing to really get excited about other than he's an ad. So I just don't see good depth here for this group because McDavid, Hyman, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins, I mean, there's your power play, basically. And if you can shut them down, there's not much chance of the others contributing other than the unknowns like Isaac Howard, who we don't know. Will he be a star right away? Will he ever be a star?
Couple that with the fact that the Oilers are the second oldest team in the NHL, averaging 31 years of age. Only Pittsburgh is older. So now let's bring the other piece of this in, that if you're Stan Bowman, you're trying to negotiate with Connor McDavid. Obviously, McDavid would love to win in Edmonton. But do you see him locking up for 8 years, similar to the way Leon Draisaitl did? Or do you see it more closer to the Evan Bouchard deal, where he is locked up for only 4 years?
You're going to have to pay him at least $16 million, which is unconscionable to me that any hockey player would make $16 million. But if Leon Draisaitl's making 14, obviously Connor McDavid's got to make more than him. And is it just going to be 15? I doubt it. It'd probably be 16. And I think it's all between Connor McDavid and the owner of the Oilers. I really don't even think this is a GM negotiation. I think the GM can take the information given to him from the agent and deliver it to the owner. But at the end of the day, it's the owner that's going to make the decision on signing these checks.
At what point does it stop becoming about money?
Stop becoming about money?
Yeah.
I think if Connor McDavid wants to go and try his hand someplace else, it won't be about money. It'll just be about, I want to go somewhere else. I want to be, I don't know, I want to play for Toronto. I'm just picking that out because he's from there. It'll be whether Connor McDavid wants to commit to his whole career being in Edmonton, or does he want to go somewhere else? And, who knows what the answer to that is.
If a deal is not consummated, could you see a situation similar to the one with Mitch Marner and the Maple Leafs and the Golden Knights, where it was trade to Vegas and Marner signs for 8 years somewhere else? Could you see the same situation with McDavid?
No, because I don't think that Edmonton will let it get into the situation that Toronto let it get into, where Marner had complete control over the negotiations and over where he ended up going. By the time they realized their window was closing, it was slam closed on the Maple Leafs, and they were stuck for the whole season with Mitch Marner. If you remember with Marner, they asked him if he would take a trade to Carolina, and he wouldn't do it. So he had complete control over the process, and when he decided to leave at the end of the year, he left. I don't think that'll happen with the Edmonton Oilers in this situation. It would be shocking if they didn't re-sign him, because we just can't imagine Connor McDavid playing somewhere else. But when you look at their lineup, if it's all about winning a Stanley Cup, I truly don't think that this group is going to win a Stanley Cup.
And when you look at their backline and their goaltending, Ekholm and Bouchard, first pair, Darnell Nurse and Brett Kulak, and then Jake Wallman and Ty Emberson. I mean, it's a middle-of-the-road pack. The goaltending, which had some question marks during the playoffs last year between Stu Skinner and Calvin Pickard, returns. So once again, this team simply isn't better as we enter training camp coming into the 25-26 season. Doesn't mean that some improvements won't be made, but as we look at this club right now, they're not closer to winning the Stanley Cup. And I think we could both agree that the 6-game final with the Florida Panthers last year was probably a little bit flattering because that series really should have gone no more than 5.
Agreed. And I agree with you on this Edmonton Oilers team, too, that I don't think they're any closer or have made improvements over that team that lost in 6 in the final. I don't think that what I'm seeing is better than what skated off the ice in Florida. So we'll have to see. There is some unknown, so that we're not being completely negative about them. Isaac Howard, Hobey Baker winner, Matthew Savoy, Podkolzin, Frederick, what's he going to contribute? Mangiapane, can he contribute? But we're not talking about even really second-line players. We're talking about third-line players. And if Howard doesn't have a good start, who plays on the first or second line? And Bud Colson, and Savoy. I mean, there are some real question marks here that could go either way.
The great unknown in the great white north.
For sure.
The Vegas Golden Knights came in first in the Pacific a year ago, 110 points. Defeated Minnesota in the first round of the playoffs in 6 games before falling to the Oilers in 5 in round 2. They have made the postseason in 7 out of their first 8 seasons. And right behind the storylines in Edmonton with McDavid, the single biggest move of this offseason has been the addition for Vegas of Mitch Marner in a trade with Toronto, exchanged for center Nick Waugh. Marner signed an 8-year, $12 million AAV full no movement clause. So Vegas has had a reputation since they came into the NHL the very first year when they made the finals of going for it. And this is simply another example of it.
They always seem to find a way to get the big fish into the boat. It's really amazing that they keep doing this. Having said that, they're not world beaters. They're not the Florida Panthers. If we call the Florida Panthers the best team in the league, they're not yet the Florida Panthers. I mean, I like their first line. Their second line I like, but then it starts to drop off after that. And you can't be paying $12 million and $10 million and $8 million to people and think that you've got enough money left to be really strong in the third and fourth line.
Well, they are currently $7.6 million over the salary cap as of now, so something's going to have to be done. And interestingly, they are rated among the lowest teams in the NHL in terms of their prospect pool. And do you think that that is a large contributor to the fact that they're always going for it with active players and not building that pool? They're just trying to get free agents and make trades. And it's a very different way of building than a lot of other clubs in the league.
Well, and at some point they're going to pay the piper. They can't keep going like this because at some point, Mark Stone, Tomas Hertl, certainly Brandon Saad, William Karlsson, Riley Smith. I mean, these guys are going to expire. Their careers in the NHL are going to expire. And if they don't have the prospects to fill in and they don't have anybody to trade, they're going to go down. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about this coming year. And for this coming year, certainly they're going to have some real good power.
Let's just talk about the other moves during the course of this offseason to date. In addition to Marner, Jeremy Lauzon and Colton Sissons come in a trade with Nashville in exchange for defenseman Nick Hague, and Jacob Megna signed as a UFA from Florida. Among the players that they lost, in addition to the ones that we've already mentioned, Tanner Pearson signs as a UFA with Winnipeg, and Victor Olofsson signs as a UFA with the Colorado Avalanche. And one other note that I think this is a good defense. We'll talk about the forwards in a second. This is an upper third defense in the NHL, but they are going to be without Alex Pietrangelo for at least the 2025-26 season, and perhaps a career-ending hip injury requiring bilateral femur reconstructive surgery. So this would be a really big loss for Vegas, but I think this is one of the few teams that might be able to overcome that.
Yeah, I mean, they did get Lazan, who's a usable piece on defense, and their top four are pretty good with Theodore McNabb, Hannafin, and Whitecloud. They play a pretty good system of defense, and Bruce Cassidy has them pretty structured, so they should be okay. But that is a big loss. Pietrangelo is a big loss to them, and as you said, he'll be gone for the whole season, so they're going to have to find a way to make up for that.
Rookie Caden Korzak will round out the top six. But let's look at their forward group, because I think we differ a little bit on opinion here. You question their depth. I think that they can roll four.
Maybe they can, but, Riley Smith basically signed with the Rangers a year ago, and the Rangers basically gave him back. Brandon Saad was thrown away by St. Louis and signed in Vegas. He's a third liner. William Karlsson is slated to be the center on that line. Fourth line, Howden, Sissons, and Kolasar. Yeah, they can roll four and be okay. I'm not saying that they're not going to be okay. They have better depth than Edmonton. Wouldn't you agree?
I certainly do. And I think these top two lines, Jack Eichel, Mitch Marner, and Pavel Dorofeev, and then Hertl, Mark Stone, and Ivan Barbashev, are a high-quality group. I mean, this is in the top third of the league in terms of top six forwards.
It is. Edmonton has elite top five, I think, in McDavid and in Draisaitl and in Nugent-Hopkins. This is a deeper team up front. And on defense, they may not have the stars, the Bouchard with the 200-mile-an-hour slap shot. They may not have that, but they do have a very serviceable group of defensemen, especially the top four.
It's just interesting last year, though, that given all that firepower, and they had an offense that was fifth in the NHL during the regular season, 3.34 goals per game. But in the playoffs, they dropped off considerably to 2.55 goals per game. They only scored 10 goals in the second round series against Edmonton. They were shut out in games 4 and 5. Mark Stone missed that final game with an upper body injury. And there was even some question about whether or not Jack Eichel was healthy, because he certainly wasn't shooting the puck as much as we're used to. So particularly with Stone, who seems to have a nagging injury or two or three every single year, and Eichel is going to be a UFA at the end of this coming season. So I think this window is relatively narrow for this club.
It is. They're going to have to try to get something done here this year, and maybe they can. Let's talk about their unknowns. Is Keegan Kolasar going to keep improving? How good can Dorofeev be? I mean, can he even go get more goals? We all know he's a sniper. Probably their unknowns in goal. If you talk about that for a minute, they have Schmid coming in now and Aiden Hill. Aiden Hill, obviously the starting goaltender for them, the number one guy. He'll be backed up by Akira Schmid. So, I mean, Vic, right now they look like we'll get through the rest of this division, but they look like they are going to be fighting for first place all year in the Pacific Division.
And I think the one thing we can say about Aiden Hill, as compared to maybe Stu Skinner in Edmonton, he's won the Stanley Cup. Maybe not spectacular, but he got it done. And I've advocated for Skinner, but you can't argue with the championships here.
True. You can't hang it all on Stu Skinner, but certainly when they played the last 2 years against the Panthers in the final, Bobrovsky was better than the Edmonton goaltending. And he's an elite goalie, Bobrovsky, no doubt about it. But they didn't lose only because of goaltending.
The Los Angeles Kings. A lot to talk about here. For the fourth consecutive spring, they lost to the Oilers in the opening round of the postseason. And before we get into that series, which was one that they completely had in hand on several occasions and let get away. Let's talk about the moves that Ken Holland has done in his first year as Kings general manager. Here are the signings. Corey Perry from Edmonton, 1 year, $2 million. Yoel Armia from Montreal, 2 years, $2.5 million. Cody Ceci from Dallas, 4 years, $4.5 million, which I think surprised a lot of us. Brian Dumoulin comes in from Jersey, 3 years, $4 million per year. So just those first four players, average age 34.3 years. And I believe a lot of people had questions about these signings.
There was a lot of criticism of Ken, and let's say one thing. You talk about how LA has been knocked out 4 years in a row, which led to Rob Blake resigning as general manager of LA. And I guess Luc Robitaille and crew thought, well, if we can't beat Edmonton, we might as well go get their general manager. So Ken, a year later, he had a year off, ends up being the GM, and he takes criticism for the age of the players that he signed in Dumoulin and CC and so on. They're certainly not going to be a young group, because up front, having, never mind Perry, who's might be the oldest player in the league, and Brent Burns maybe a shade older, and Alex Ovechkin's up there too. But Kopitar is getting on. I mean, he still plays fantastically. And their top defenseman, Drew Doughty, is getting long in the tooth as well. So this is a team that's got to do better now in order to make their fans happy. They can't keep losing in the first round.
Well, can we assume, though, that with the signing of Perry, that the Kings are a shoo-in to represent the Western Conference in the Stanley Cup Final, only to use because Perry has made the final 5 out of the last 6 years and has lost all of them? He's the only player in the history of the league to reach the Stanley Cup Final with 5 different franchises.
He's amazing. He's an ever-ready bunny. He keeps on going and going. And, of course, he has a relationship with Ken Holland because it was Ken that signed him in Edmonton after Chicago had released him. So, it might be the right magic secret sauce for LA to get into the final.
Let's talk about the other moves during the course of the summer, and then we'll get into some other discussion. They also add goaltender Anton Forsberg, signed as a UFA from Ottawa, and defenseman Samuel Bolduc, who is not qualified by the New York Islanders. The Forsberg signing is also done because David Riddick signed as a UFA with the Islanders, and they also lost Vladislav Gavrikov, who signed with the New York Rangers. In terms of players that they held on to during the course of this offseason, we'll start with the UFAs. Goaltender Phoenix Copley will probably be the number 3. And left wing Andrei Kuzmenko, who came over towards the deadline from the Philadelphia Flyers after he'd been acquired by Philadelphia from Calgary. And also promising right wing Alex Laferriere, 3 years, 4.1 AAV. So you look at this club right now, and even though they are veteran, they are older, they've got some good young players on this team, and you've got to go back and look at that series against the Oilers this past spring to see how much more growing pains this team has to endure before they take that next step and at least get into the second round. So in that first round series against the Oilers, to put this in perspective, the Kings defense was second in the NHL behind Winnipeg. 2.48 goals per game with Darcy Kemper leading the way in net. They wind up giving up 27 goals in the 6 games against the Oilers. You remember in game 1, they blew that 5-2 lead, but they wound up winning in the final minute on a goal by Philip Deneau. They won that one 6-5, but that was kind of a harbinger of what was to come. Because in game 3, they had a 4-3 lead with 6:42 left. Evander Kane tied the game, and then that brutal challenge by head coach Jim Hiller led to the winning goal by Evan Bouchard 10 seconds after that. And then in Game 4, they had a 3-1 lead in the third period. Bouchard ties the game with 29 seconds left. If you remember, Quentin Byfield made that ill-advised play at the blue line trying to stick handle out of the zone as opposed to just flipping the puck out. So you look at this, they were close. And when they exerted that physical style on the Oilers, Edmonton couldn't move. And this was really a case in multiple games in that series where they simply took their foot off the gas.
Well, they simply couldn't hold on, and Edmonton had the confidence that they could come back, and they did. The team that we had seen all regular season disappeared for LA, I think. You're right, Jim Hiller made a bad move, but he's a rookie head coach calling for that challenge, and that cost them dearly, and that's all it takes sometimes in the playoffs is one thing like that. But, you know, on the upside for this team, Kuzmenko was very impressive to me, the way he could play, especially on the power play. Adrian Kempe, I think, is a young star that's going to continue to progress. Kevin Fiala is a good player. Remember last year he was late for a meeting and wasn't dressed by Jim Hiller during the regular season. Quentin Byfield has a real upside to him, and he's coming along in his game. I like Moore. I like Deneau. I like Fogle. So they do have some depth on this team. They don't have stars up front besides Kempe, but they've got, if you want to manage by committee, I mean, they've got, I think, 4 solid lines. Now, where I think, Vic, that they've tailed off a little bit is what can we expect out of Drew Doughty? And they lost Gavrikov in free agency to the Rangers. And that's a big blow to them because he's an excellent defenseman to play with Mikey Anderson or with Doughty or whoever they deem that. And they go and replace him with the older guys that we just mentioned. So I don't think their defense is great. It's serviceable, but it's not great. I think they're better up front than they are on the back line.
And the defense is probably mid-range, and the forwards in the top half of the league for sure. But you could also tell that this team is, even though they've got some good young players, and Byfield, mistake aside, in Game 4 of the series against the Oilers, I thought it had a really strong second half, and I think that trajectory is going to just continue to go upwards here. But they're not deep in terms of their prospects, and given the ages of their veterans and the guys that they signed, and the fact that Jim Hiller was not brought in by Ken Holland, because obviously Ken Holland's starting his first year, Jim Hiller's already there. What do you think the patience level is going to be if this team gets off to a slow start?
Yeah, I would think that Ken's been around a long time, so he'll probably be very patient. If and when he sees it can't keep going, he knows enough people around the league and knows who's out there, who's available. I guess first on that list is going to be Peter DeBoer. And I don't know that Ken knows Peter DeBoer, but I do know that Peter DeBoer is a heck of a coach in the league. And it's not very comfortable for a second-year head coach who disappointed in last year's playoffs to be starting the season with Peter DeBoer looking over his shoulder. And so it'll be interesting to see if Jim Hiller can get this group to get a good start going, because you need to have a good start. We've learned that in the league. You can't come back from a bad start to the regular season. It's really hard.
The Calgary Flames missed the playoffs for the 3rd consecutive season, 4th time in the last 5 years. They took it right to the end, and they were one of the great surprises of the NHL last season. They lost out to the St. Louis Blues, and the head-to-head really became the determining factor because they wound up getting knocked out on the regulation win tiebreaker, and they were 0-2-1 against the Blues during the course of the regular season. This is a club that is going to be really stretched for offense. They were 29th in the league, 2.68 goals scored per game, and they didn't do a lot during the course of the offseason. They did hold on to some RFAs and UFAs, but they have no ads coming from other teams despite having $15.4 million in cap space.
They didn't add a lot to make the Calgary fans get real excited. In fact, they didn't add anything to get them all excited, except for the fact that they continued to keep their own players with 2 losses in Vladar and Anthony Mantha. Vladar, of course, the goaltender that signed in Philadelphia, and Anthony Mantha that signed in Pittsburgh. So basically, Vic, we got the same team coming back this year that played last year. And again, I guess the upside here is, can the young players continue to improve? I say that about every team, but it's true. If your young people continue to improve, their back line with Ball and Anderson and Hanley and Mackenzie Weegar, Jake Bean, it's not a bad group. It's probably in the top half of the league. And up front, they've got some depth. But like you said, they don't have the scoring. They're going to work hard to get their goals.
Let's look at the players that they have held on to during the offseason. We'll do the RFAs first. Matt Coronado, a winger, 7 years, $6.5 million on average. They also kept defenseman Kevin Ball, 6 years, $5.35. Right wing Adam Klapka, and center Morgan Frost, who was acquired from the Philadelphia Flyers. He signs on for 2 more years, 4.35 AAV, and also center Justin Kirkland. He re-signed as a UFA, as did defenseman Joel Hanley. So what you see is what you get with this club. And you just mentioned that the offense is going to be hard-pressed. I thought Jonathan Huberdeau, for probably the first time in the 3 seasons that he's been in Calgary, looked more comfortable. He was a leader as this team tried to press for the playoffs along with Nazem Kadri. Huberdeau got back up to 62 points last season, but that's still 53 shy of the number that he put up in Florida in his last season there in 2021-22.
Yes, and there was an article written this summer about bad contracts and who's got the worst, that listed a bunch of players, and Huberdeau was number 1 by far of being overpaid for the production he's giving the Flames. So, you would like to think you can expect more out of him in Calgary, so the Calgary gets their money's worth, because they certainly haven't gotten it yet.
They haven't. And before we go forward with them, want to go back to the other end of the ice, talk about their goaltending, because Dustin Wolf was outstanding last season and was right there for the Calder Trophy. His Rookie of the Year, didn't get it, but it's really him. And with Vladar off to Philadelphia, the projected backup is Devin Cooley, who has 2 NHL games under his belt, and that was with San Jose in 2023-24. You get an injury to Wolf, you got a problem between your pipes.
No, you definitely do. And that's where I'm surprised that Calgary hasn't done anything to go and get an experienced guy. If you want to call Cooley number 3, or call him number 2, but have a good number 3, somebody that can play in the NHL and that could steal a game or 2. But their depth there is certainly, Wolf has 1 year under his belt. Okay, he was fantastic last year, no doubt. But he's only got 1 year under his belt. So they're going with a guy with 1 year experience and a guy with no experience.
Before we wrap up with the Flames, a couple of notes on their back line. That Rasmus Andersson, still a Flame. There was a lot of rumor last year that he was going to get moved. He'll be a UFA after this season. So we'll see if the Flames can extend him longer term, or if they look to move him if the Flames fall out of playoff contention. And maybe a player that cracks the lineup this year on the back line, Zane Parekh, first pick, 9th overall in 2024. But I think the upshot here, Neil, is this is a club that overachieved. They did not make any moves to bring anybody in during the offseason, and they're not going to sneak up on anybody this time around.
No, they're not. And they've got a powerhouse that we've already described that just sits in the same province up to the north of them that they've got to play a number of times. So it's not going to be an easy year for Calgary. they're going to be trying to get into the wild card spot. That's about the best you can hope for with Calgary, is that they're going to try to get one of those 2 wild card spots.
There's a couple of teams that are going to be looking to go past the Flames this coming season. Vancouver, Anaheim, Seattle, and San Jose will be the clubs that we talk about next after this word from Lugaroo. There's a brand born in hockey locker rooms that now outfits the majority of pro sports teams across North America. It's called Lugaroo. Lugaroo makes performance apparel for every moment of an athlete's day. The early lift, the morning skate, the flight to the next city, or dinner after a win. Quiet, technical, built to last, no noise, no ego. If you're the guy who shows up early, stays late, and doesn't need applause, this is your uniform. The cut is sharp, the details deliberate, and the gear holds its shape when the day gets heavy. Hockey players choose it because it supports the work between shifts, the hours that actually decide the game. Check out Lugaroo at lugaroo.co. That's LOOGAROO.co. And use the promo code Wraparound and you'll get free shipping. More than ready, Lugaroo. And again, we thank Lugaroo for being the presenting sponsor for these summer coolers. And please support them the way they have supported the NHL Wraparound podcast. We continue with the Vancouver Canucks. First-year head coach Adam Foote takes over a team that missed the playoffs for the 4th time in the last 5 seasons and 8th time in the last 10 campaigns. One upside statistically for them, their penalty killing, 3rd in the league, 82.6%. But besides that, Neil, I want to turn back the clock to a year ago when we did the summer cooler with Vancouver. They were coming off that second round 7-game loss to the Edmonton Oilers in 2024, and there was so much promise. They re-signed Elias Pettersson and Filip Hronek. They also retained Tyler Myers, Dakota Joshua, Teddy Bluger, and they signed as free agents Jake DeBrusk, Derek Forbort, Danton Hyman, Kiefer Sherwood, and Vincent Desharnais. And yours truly, and I have fallen on the sword with this one all season going back to last year, that I thought this team had everything filled in. And then it was one fiasco after another. It was Pettersson and JT Miller not getting along. It was the Brock Besser contract. It was the Thatcher Demko injury. And it was whether or not Rick Tocchet was going to extend as head coach with the team in his 3rd and what it turned out to be final season. The team didn't start well. They never really gained traction. And I think behind Nashville, you could argue they were perhaps the most disappointing team in the NHL last year.
Oh, easily. You know, they were in first place. It's funny, you read their statistics that you said that they missed for the 4th time in 5 seasons. And the time they made it, they ended up in first in their division. I mean, when does that ever happen? That you 4 out of 5 years you don't make the playoffs, but the one year you did, you hung a banner up for it. I think their whole season was just a catastrophe from one thing to the other. If it wasn't the bullying JT Miller on Elias Pettersson, and made Pettersson have a horrible year, and Pettersson, who was their 102-point scorer in 22-23, 2 years later dropped down to 45 points with only 15 goals after a high of 39 and 34 the year before. So he really dropped off even with the new contract. And JT Miller was traded away for Philip Hedl. Of course, Philip Hedl goes out with another in a series of concussions that he's had during his career. That it didn't turn out too well for them. Brock Besser, who is one of their best players easily, was allowed to try free agency, although he did sign back with the Canucks. the fact is that he could have walked away and decided not to. So there was a lot of things. I mean, the Rick Tocchet thing, was he going to come back? Was he not? Now he ends up back in Philadelphia. That's strange too. How many times does a coach just walk away and go somewhere else? And then Adam Foote now is getting his opportunity to be a head coach in the NHL. So it was a bizarre year. Quinn Hughes was hurt for a number of games for them, and he's their franchise defenseman, former Norris Trophy winner. Not to mention the fact that they've got 3 guys on the team that all have the same name, Pedersen.
Yeah.
And they got 2 guys that have the same first and last name in Elias Pettersson, the defenseman whose middle name is Nils, and, of course, the aforementioned Elias Pettersson, the former 102-point scorer.
Let's hit the offseason movement for this club. And as you mentioned, after everything that went on with Brock Besser, he winds up staying on for 7 years at $7.25 million. They also re-signed Thatcher Demko for 3 years at $8.5 million. They also keep center RFA Atu Ratu, who's slated in as a third center behind Pedersen and Philip Hedl. In terms of one other significant add, get Evander Kane from the Oilers, gives him a little bit more jam up front. He comes in on June 25th. They also signed P.O. Joseph, who was not qualified by the Pittsburgh Penguins, and Chase Stillman, who was acquired in a trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins for goaltender Artur Silovs. So the drops, in addition to Silovs, who had that very impressive playoff run in 2024. Dakota Joshua traded to Toronto. Phil DiGiuseppe signs as a UFA with Winnipeg. Pius Suter, big loss there, signs as a UFA with St. Louis. And Noah Yulson signs as an unrestricted free agent with the Philadelphia Flyers. So I look at the collective on this team, Neil. Look at the forward group. Top 6, not bad. Bottom 6 starts to thin out a little bit. I don't think their defense is bad at all with Hughes. Teamed up with Filip Hronek, who lost a lot of time last year, has one of the best and most underrated shots in the NHL from the point. There's Marcus Pettersson, Tyler Myers, Derek Forbort, who we mentioned earlier, and, of course, Elias Pettersson, the defenseman. So with that, I think there are parts here. The bar is much lower than it was a year ago. I think that works in the favor of rookie head coach Adam Foote.
I think so. You look at their top line and look at the guys they're going to have on the power play. They got Jake DeBrusk, who had his best year last year in his career, goal-scoring wise. They got to get a bounce-back year out of Elias Pettersson, the center, that between DeBrusk and Brock Besser. They brought in Evander Kane for a second-line presence. Hedl has to stay healthy, hopefully, although when you say stay healthy, it's only one injury that he keeps having, which is a concussion, and pretty tough to stay away from unless you don't go anywhere near anybody. And then they got little Connor Garland, who just runs around like a little buzzsaw, annoying everybody, including Connor McDavid. He even got Connor McDavid to get suspended. And then after that, they've got reasonable depth, not great depth. You know, they're going to be depending on that first line, DeBrusk, Pettersson, and Besser, for sure. I mean, Evander Kane was a third line at best on Edmonton. And as we said, they're going to have to stay healthy as well.
One final note on the Canucks. Connor Garland, career year last year. He extends with the Canucks 6 years, $6 million per, and that will be effective starting with the 2026-2027 season. The Anaheim Ducks. This is a club I could see being my team that I'm going to look to for the big step, the same way I did with Vancouver a year ago.
Oh, God. Let's call Pat Verbeek. Call Pat Verbeek and warn him if you're doing this.
Yeah, because he may not come on again. But you got to take a good look at what they've done during the course of the offseason, bringing in Chris Kreider in a trade with the New York Rangers. Center Ryan Poehling comes in a deal that sent Trevor Zegras to the Philadelphia Flyers. They acquire goaltender Peter Mrazek in a trade with Detroit that sent longtime netminder John Gibson to the Red Wings. And they also signed Mikael Granlund as a UFA from the Dallas Stars for 3 years at an average of $7 million per year. Kreider slated for the second line, Granlund for the third line, Poehling for the fourth line. And they are filling in a lot of pieces here among the players that they hold on to. Goaltender Ville Husso, who's re-signed by the Ducks. He will be the backup to Lukas Dostal, who signs for 5 years and $6.5 million. And Drew Helleson stays on defense. He's a third pair defender, voided arbitration, both him and Dostal. So in the bigger picture of things here, you look at these players that have been acquired, that have been held on to. They lose Zegras, they lose Gibson, and I still think this is a club when you look at the veteran adds, the veteran existence, and the youth on this team, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism in Anaheim.
I think there is a reason for optimism, and I think Pat Verbeek is turned this thing around nicely. I mean, we would have said two to 3 years ago that automatic, basically, that they're not going to be in. I don't think it's automatic that they won't make it this year. I think they could cause a lot of noise. But having said that, they got 3 pretty good lines to come at you with Gauthier, Carlson, Kaloran, Chris Kreider with McTavish and Terry. They got Vetrano, who shoots the puck 100 times a game, with Ryan Strome and Mikael Granlund. That's a pretty good line. But where I think they really fall off, Vic, is that after Radko Gudas and Jacob Trouba, who are the rest of the defensemen? I mean, I can see who they are, but who are they?
Neil, to your point, 4 players that will make up the balance of the Ducks defense, all aged between 21 and 24. We have the 21-year-olds, Olin Zellweger and Pavel Mintyukov, and 24-year-olds Jackson Lacombe and Drew Helleson, who, as we mentioned before, was re-signed as an RFA. But I think when you look at the collective here, I like the mix with this team. And there's another young player that was selected 3rd overall in 2024. It was a bit of a surprise, but he's put up great numbers for Oshawa the last 2 years. And that's Bennett Seneca, who put up 154 points over the last 2 campaigns. And as a junior player, a plus 57. And that included 86 points last year with the Generals. So a lot to look forward to in Anaheim.
Well, for sure. I don't like their defense starting out the season with those young guys, because I know how long it takes young players to become good all-around NHL defensemen. But you could say they're backed up by really good goaltending in Lukas Dostal and Peter Mrazek as his backup. Dostal proved that he's good enough to take over the reins when they traded John Gibson, who was rumored to be traded for, it seems, forever. So we'll see what we get. If the defense can mature and overachieve, this team may have a real shot, because they are okay up front. Certainly Kreider adds to their net front presence. Ryan Strome knows him from his days with the Rangers. Mikael Granlund, we saw him in the playoffs do great stuff for the Dallas Stars, and he was really good on San Jose. Gets himself back out to California, where he must be happy to be, because he was with the Sharks and now with the Ducks. But you're right, Vic. I mean, this could be a surprise team. This team could take people by surprise this year.
2 more points here. 1 in goal, 1 behind the bench. And don't want people thinking that we have forgotten about Joel Kenville. But I want to talk about Lukas Dostal first, because he is now the clear-cut number 1. And he did spend a lot of time while John Gibson was hurt periodically last season. But you know, Neil, it's a lot different when you're a career backup and then you are thrust into that number one role. And I'm going to be very curious to see how he responds.
Well, yeah, because this is his first year as being the clear-cut number one. But I really like him. I think he's going to be just fine. And Mrazek is a very experienced guy, not as good as he once was, but certainly very experienced. And I'm sure that tandem will work well together. I have more confidence in Dostal than I have in that group of defensemen. We'll see what happens, how these young guys go. That's the unknowns, right? It's always a question marks as the young guys because you haven't seen them enough and they haven't shown you enough to predict how they're going to play. But I do think that Pat Verbeek has, with his hiring of Joel Kenville, has put them in position at a good shot at a wild card spot.
So let's talk about the second winningest coach in NHL history, only behind Scotty Bowman. We had Verbeek on earlier in the summer, and the club went through considerable vetting of Kenville, who had been out of the league since the fall of 2021 for essentially inaction regarding the video coach with the Chicago Blackhawks when they made their run for their first of the 3 Stanley Cups last decade in 2010. I think the guidance that Kenville can give this club, and it's not to take a shot at Rick Tocchet for his work in Vancouver last year because he was coming off an Adams Trophy winning year, but there is something about the championship pedigree that Kenville brings to a club that appears now ready to take that next step. Where do you see his influence on this team taking the greatest shape?
I think that he's going to be good for the young players. He was a defenseman himself. I think the relationship that he's got with Pat Verbeek that we talked about when Pat Verbeek was on, that goes all the way back to when they played on the Whalers together. I think that's really important. I think that he can have an influence all over the club. He has shown that he can get players to overachieve and win championships. We're not even close to that with Anaheim, but I think he'll have a positive impact throughout the organization with his experience.
Certainly a team to look for to push for the playoffs in the spring of 2026. The Seattle Kraken. Neil, of the 32 teams that we will have covered, this one kind of excites me the least because there's not a lot here that I could say is positive in terms of the club getting into the playoffs or even pushing for a bubble spot. They were 27th overall in the NHL last season. Lane Lambert replaces Dan Bosma behind the bench, who was hired a year ago. He only lasts one season. Why him?
That's not a question for me. I have no idea. And I'm not putting him down by saying that. That's all goes back to Ron Francis and the Seattle organization, why they would pick Lane Lambert. He had a decent run in New York with the Islanders. He didn't do a bad job there, but I don't know. You know, they did it quickly, Vic. They did it before the playoffs ended, I believe. And so I don't know why.
It's just a situation with them where you have to wonder if this is a club that's being haunted by two things. First of all, the Vegas Golden Knights and how they came into the league making the Stanley Cup final in their very first season. But then the Kraken had a great run deep into the second round. In their second season of the NHL, they have missed the playoffs the last 2 years. And it feels to me like the franchise is fighting this, both of these cases.
I got to say, like, I like a couple of things that they did in the offseason, besides the new GM that they put in place. Ron Francis replaced himself with Jason Botterill. And again, if you ask me why Botterill, I would say I have no idea. Why Ron Francis would step away from being the GM, which is a thing that he's been pretty good at. But I like the Mason Marchment pickup from Dallas. I think that gives him some more firepower up front. I do like also the Ryan Lindgren acquisition as a free agent on the back end. I liked Lindgren a lot when he was in New York. I do think, Vic, that they've got a pretty good defense core. When you talk about Vince Dunn, who's really good offensively, Adam Larson, Brandon Montour, and now Ryan Lindgren. I think their defense is okay. And I know they didn't do a lot, but they did enough things, and we'll see what Lane Lambert can get out of this group. They're not the worst in the league by far, but they didn't do a lot of exciting things in the offseason.
They also acquired Frederick Gaudreau in a trade with the Minnesota Wild, and they signed goaltender Matt Murray for 1 year, $1 million from the Toronto Maple Leafs. In terms of their RFA, UFA re-signs, we start with the UFAs first. They held on to center John Hayden and defenseman Josh Mahura. And their RFAs of significance, Ty Cartier, a left wing, and Capo Caco, who I think found a home in Seattle after kind of getting out of the pressure cooker in New York. He re-ups for 3 years at $4.5 million AAV. There are notable drops. Andrei Burakovsky traded to Chicago in the Joe Veleno deal. And then Veleno winds up getting released, winds up signing with the Montreal Canadiens. And Mikey Eyssimont signed as a UFA by the Boston Bruins. I think also, Neil, what's significant is there hasn't been, there's not a lot of fanfare with the offseason moves here. And more importantly, some of these players have to start performing from within the organization that have been there. They've got a little bit of tenure. And I think it's going to be imperative on them to have an upswing this season if this team is going to compete. I don't think they're a wild card team, but if they're going to give it a push, they need guys like Jared McCann to start stepping up a little bit here. Because 2 years ago, McCann came off a 40-goal season. I think surprised a lot of people and dropped to 29 following year and only 22 last season. And Matty Beniers, Calder Trophy winner in 2023, he's only had 35 goals and 80 points over the course of the last 2 seasons. That's an average of 40 points per season. I mean, even I can figure that out. And that's not going to get it done for a team that's kind of middle of the pack in scoring. Their power play, with Jessica Campbell actually in charge of it in her first season as the first female behind an NHL bench, actually dropped from 16th in 23-24 to 23rd last season. So those are all components that need to improve in the 25-26 season.
Absolutely. And you've got to hope, if you're Seattle and their fans, that you can get some career years out of some of these guys. Capo Caco, Matty Beniers, Jaden Schwartz, Mason Marchment prove himself. Shane Wright suddenly show why at one time he was slated to go first overall in the draft, and then he slipped, and he's still never been able to be a regular game in and game out player. As I said before, I think their defense is okay. I don't mind their goaltending with Joey Decord and Philip Grubauer. And then they've, as you mentioned, they signed Matt Murray, 2-time Stanley Cup winner in Pittsburgh, although that seems like decades ago. He's their number 3, as he was in Toronto. So, Lane Lambert's going to have to come in, change whatever was wrong in the atmosphere with the Kraken last year, and start to put in his way of seeing the game and his systems, and get these guys to play a lot better than they did last year.
You like your goaltending?
I mean, I don't mind it. I don't hate it. It's not terrible. It's not great. Okay, you win. It's not good.
I mean, here's my upshot here is I don't play fantasy, but I did look at a couple of things just in terms of how goaltenders were valued. And Philip Grubauer 2 years ago was projected to be in 40% of the pools, and last year dropped to 5%. And I don't think he would be in anybody's selection mindset this year as a goaltender. I think he's underperformed there. I think Decord is okay. I think Murray's a crapshoot. And I think that this is a marginal group between the pipes, to say the most.
You know what, partner? I can't argue with you on that. I said I liked them, and then you made me refocus again, and that's a place that they're not very good, and they got to be better.
I'm also a little bit more hopeful on Shane Wright because he was the 4th pick in 2022, did have 44 points last year and was a +4. So he plays on a line with Mason Marchment and Eli Tolvanen. I think he can improve those numbers, maybe get up to 60 points this year. And this is another guy that if he could push his way upward, it is certainly going to help make this team a lot more competitive than, at least on paper, I'm seeing them right now.
Yeah, I mean, last year was his first full season with the Kraken, and as you said, he got 19 goals, 44 points. He was a +4, which is hard to do on a team that's losing. Before that, he'd only had 5 goals in his career in the 2 seasons that he'd played in the organization. So he finally broke in last year, but he's going to have to continue to show why he was a number 4 overall pick in the 22 draft.
Just to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, one of the stats that really amazed me with this team last year was Adam Larson, defenseman, still managed to finish with a +22.
Wow.
On a team that finished the season 24th on team defense.
That is amazing. And as I said earlier, their defense is okay. I mean, they're not going to lose because of bad defense. Probably you've hit the nail on the head. Their goaltending isn't very good, and they're going to have to put some pucks in the net at the other end to make up for it.
You're saying that I'm hitting the nail on the head. This is a good jumping off point for me on Seattle.
Let's move on.
We wrap up with the San Jose Sharks. Neil, to me, this club looks a lot like where Anaheim was a year ago. They didn't lose much, but they pick up the following players via trade and free agency. I'm going to start with goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic, trade with Pittsburgh. John Klingberg signs as a UFA from Edmonton, as does left wing Jeff Skinner. Adam Gaudette. There's a little bit of offense coming in from Ottawa. Philip Kurashev was not qualified by the Blackhawks. He signs with the Sharks. Nick Leddy claimed off waivers from St. Louis. Tough guy Ryan Reeves comes in a trade with Toronto. And I think the most significant add to this club, defenseman Dmitry Orlov signs for 2 years and $6.5 million as a UFA from Carolina.
Orlov is a real good offensive defenseman. I mean, as you said, they get Skinner. He's a good offensive player. He's still got some gas in the tank, and they got Barclay Goodrow, who's winding down his career. I still don't think they have enough, though, to be a team that's going to bang on the door for the wild card spots. I think they're going to be in that last group. You know how we have the teams that are for sure in, then we have the bubble teams, and then we have the group that's beneath the bubble teams, and I believe they're going to stay in that group beneath the bubble teams.
This club missed the playoffs for the 6th consecutive season last year. Last overall, only 52 points. But I could conceivably see this team escaping the bottom quarter of the NHL and maybe moving up overall into that 22, 23, 24 area in the league standings, because there's a lot of young talent on this club. And we need to start with Macklin Celebrini, the first overall pick in the 2024 entry draft. 63 points in 70 games. You got to remember that he missed his 12 games right after opening night. was injured opening night, missed 12 more, and then played the rest of the season from that. And we talked in the Central Division Summer Cooler about his game compared to Connor Bedard. And I like his 200-foot game much better than the Chicago center.
Oh, I do too. But he doesn't maybe have that high-end offensive skill level that Bedard has, but he's got a more complete game, I believe, when I watch the two of them play. And I don't know, Vic, I don't really agree with you that this team is going to move up that high in the National Hockey League ladder. I think they're still going to struggle. Their goaltending, what do you think of their goaltending? Now, we tore apart the last goaltenders. I mean, they've got Askarov and Nedeljkovic, and Nedeljkovic is the Mr. Inconsistency if there ever was one. And Askarov, I don't know him that well to say what he is.
He came in last year with a lot of fanfare. He's got a lot of flair to his game. And he was a guy that came over from Nashville because he wasn't getting playing time there. He's going to get playing time here. By the way, I should note also that the goaltender that finished in that number one slot for them a year ago, Alexander Georgiev, is still without a contract. So be interested if perhaps he comes back as a number three, because the Sharks have a lot of money in terms of salary cap space. So I think there's worse goaltending in the NHL. I mean, we just talked about Seattle. I would take Askarov and Nedeljkovic over Grubauer and Decourt. I'll start there.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, I would rather see San Jose with Georgiev than Nedeljkovic, but maybe that's just it's pie in the sky dreaming on my part, because Georgiev did have some decent nights with Colorado and was pretty good as a young guy in New York. I don't understand why Georgiev, his game has dropped off the way it has. But anyway, we're talking about the Sharks. Yeah, I'd take Nedeljkovic and Askarov over the goaltending that we saw just now in Seattle.
Not to get too far away from the subject of the Sharks, but I could also see a guy like Georgiev perhaps signing in Calgary to give them a little bit more depth, because they certainly don't have a lot behind Dustin Wolf. But we digress, because I also want to talk about another player that had a really strong second half last year, and he slotted in as the number two center behind Celebrini, and that's Will Smith.
Yeah, Will Smith, number two on this jersey as a centerman. Wears it because of Brian Leach. I got to get that in again, as they were big fans of Brian Leach, his dad was. And no, him and Celebrini are the future of this club. There's no doubt about that. How high can they go with their skill level and their offensive production? I think sky's the limit for these guys. They're good players, and they're trying to surround them with the best they can while they develop.
A couple of veterans will be playing on Smith's flank this year. Projected Jeff Skinner on the left side, Adam Gaudette on the right, and I like that Gaudette signing a lot. And Celebrini will be joined on the top line with Tyler Toffoli on the right and William Eklund, who re-signs as an RFA, 3 years, $5.6 million AAV. They got a couple of prospects in the system also, Sam Dickinson and Quentin Musty. So this is one of the best prospect pools in the NHL. And there is promise here. I think there's light at the end of this tunnel for Mike Grier and the Sharks franchise. I thought Ryan Warsofsky did a really commendable job behind the bench as a rookie head coach. I think he's going to grow well with this club. And are they a playoff team? No. Are they going to be the worst team in the NHL? I think certainly not this year. I think they're going to be much improved, maybe get to that 70-point area. And I do think there is finally reasons for optimism in the Bay Area.
I think that there should be a lot of optimism for the Sharks while they try to build this thing up. As we just said, Celebrini and Will Smith are two of the finest young NHLers in the league. As you said, too, about Askarov, I mean, he asked his way out of Nashville because he said, if I'm not going to be on the team, I don't want to wait to be in the NHL. I think I should be in the NHL now. And so, ask Rob and you shall receive. He asked, and here he is starting in San Jose.
How much of a cover charge to see you perform tonight?
I'm here all week.
That wraps up the 2025 NHL Wraparound Summer Coolers. Neil, we have gone through 32 teams. And as you had said at the beginning, we hope that we are educating, we're informing everybody of everything that took place in terms of player movement, what we expect. We try to be objective as possible with every club. We try to look at the positives, we try to look at the negatives, and we give our honest assessment. And I believe that we have accomplished that this year.
I think so.
Not that we didn't last year.
No. I think we have, and I don't look at anybody through rose-colored glasses, and I don't have any bias against any teams in the league. I just try to look at factually what's gone on with them, how much of the teams either improved or not improved. Are they getting closer to their goal? Everybody, as we just said, if you look at the league, you've got the upper echelon in every division. And those are the teams that are hoping that somehow they can get to the Stanley Cup. Then you've got the bubble teams that are trying just to get into the playoffs and displace a playoff team. And then you've got the lower group that are just going to see how good they can be. But they know they're not a playoff team, or they don't think they will be, but they're going to see how much they've improved, how much closer they are to being a playoff team. So, and I think you should have gotten a good picture of all of that after these 4 summer coolers.
And a reminder that all 32 teams will be available individually as shorts on YouTube. And I think also, Neil, before we sign off here, the amount of detail and the amount of names that are spoken, it's a lot of information to take in. It's a lot for us to research, but hopefully fans of all 32 teams will be able to take something out of what these 4 shows have brought forward.
Yes, and hopefully no matter where you're a fan, whichever team you like, you have gotten some information and some outlook about how the season looks at this point in August of 25.
One thing we can be sure of, the Florida Panthers going for history for their 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup, and 31 other clubs will be chasing them. So with that, we'd like to thank Lugaroo for being the presenting sponsor of all 4 NHL Wraparound Summer Coolers.
And while we're thanking people, let's thank you out there, the listeners. Send questions or comments to either Neil at NHLWraparound.com or Vic at NHLWraparound.com, or both of us, and get on our mailing list. All our podcasts are on all podcast platforms, including Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And our complete catalog of all our shows going back to January of 24 are available on our website, which is obviously NHLWraparound.com. Continue to get the word out to your friends, please, and subscribe. Just hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. And then take a look at lugaroo.co. Look at their merchandise that they have on there, their outerwear, and I'm sure you'll find something you really like.
And NHL Wraparound will return after Labor Day with another new franchise. This one, the Hall of Fame edition. And on Tuesday, September 2nd, we will be honored to be joined by the all-time winningest coach in NHL history, Scotty Bowman. So on behalf of Neil Smith, I'm Vic Morren, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.